Good evening, everyone. For once, I'm actually almost on time. How's everyone doing tonight? Where is everyone tonight? Open the wrong URL or something?
I can talk if you just want to hear a voice. I was coding earlier, and you know how you go to your machine and you're like, I need to get X done. And then for whatever reason, your body's on autopilot and you get Y done. That's what happened, but it felt great because I got something done.
Nice. This afternoon was a busy afternoon for me. I hit up the ATM. I grabbed 2 space heaters from my friend in East Syracuse. I drove out to Beeville to get my hair cut. Then I drove out to Cato to get a bar cart. And he ended up canceling on me on Facebook Marketplace. Then I drove back to North Syracuse, got a sub at my favorite deli. Then I picked up a smart humidifier, and then I got back. Oh, and I stopped at Dunkin' and had a coffee. So in case you can't tell, I'm going to be a little wired tonight. So totally different kind of productivity, but very, very productive. Oh, Naj, good point about the workshop.
Well, just because the people that aren't here are the people that voted that they would like to miss the class. I don't know. It's a guess.
But the workshop's tomorrow, right?
So I was thinking maybe they kind of like misread it and thought it was tonight. I don't know.
I did have 3 people let me know they were going to be late. But we'll give people 2 more minutes and then we'll dive in. Antonio was sending me a couple messages. I'm guessing you were using Chat GPT for that, Latonia? I still have not been able to get in because every time I think of it, it's a really busy time, and I know I'm on their email list to get in. But every time I go to the Chat GPT website, it says that they're full. Is everyone familiar with Chat GPT? Seen it in the headlines yet?
It only tells me it's full when I try to go on it from my phone, but when I go from my laptop, I'm always able to get in. I don't know if it's because I'm already signed in. That's something I
Oh,
have to.
that could be it. Chat GPT, for anyone who doesn't know, is was making a ton of headlines in the news for it being it's an artificial intelligence. It uses a language model, but basically you can query it for whatever you would like, and it will produce results for you. So you can say, what's the most common dog breed in the U.S. and it can answer it, or you can say, write me a 5-page essay on why Emily Dickinson is the most boring author ever, and it would also write that. Sorry, I'm a little jaded about English essays. But it is a big problem actually right now in schools and colleges because it's not, it doesn't produce the same essay every time, right? The way artificial intelligence works is it's a little bit of a black box, right? So you train it with all of this information, and then it continues to learn every time a new query comes in. And because of that, you can't take the output of ChatGPT and just run it through some plagiarism checker to know if this was a copied essay or not. And I think most high schools and colleges at this point have some kind of plagiarism tool, Turnitin and a couple other ones that are basically just giant databases of essays. And then if they detect parts of that essay, it would alert the teacher, hey, heads up, this student may have bought this essay or copied it off a friend or whatever. Well, ChatGPT is really interesting because it's artificial intelligence. It doesn't produce the same results every time. And so there's no way for a school or a professor to be able to know whether or not it was artificially generated or not. And they said it definitely varies on the topics and whether ChatGPT is very familiar with the book. But there are a couple professors who said, like, they graded the ChatGPT essay and they said, I would give this essay a B. Like, it's well written. It isn't, A worthy. It's not like the student did a ton of research, or the student, but it is producing completely competent couple page essays. And so now a lot of schools are trying to figure out the impacts of that. And what's interesting is it knows a fair amount about code. So you can actually say, write me a 10-line JavaScript function that can solve a factorial or something like that. And it will actually produce JavaScript code for you that you can copy and paste and actually have it run. So it's kind of crazy, the future of artificial intelligence.
Max, that's what I used it. The very first time I used it, I wanted to know if it was bad form to have just a rec or just a res. Like I knew you should always have a res to send something back, but I thought, well, can I just take out the rec? And after searching, I just couldn't find the answer I was looking for. So I put it in and it took a couple tries because the AI has its own way of wording the questions. So I had to learn how it was rewording my question. And then I got the perfect answer. It was like, and it basically said, yeah, like it's better form just to have it in, even if you're not using it. So I don't know, but I have seen that there's like bias in there. In addition to like a lack of certain other aspects, there is definitely biases built in.
Yeah, it's at capacity, and I know I'm on their list. We're actually trying to integrate that into our conversational code that we have. They do have an API, which is pretty interesting. That doesn't give you access to ChatGPT directly, but it gives you access to the same language models and heuristics that ChatGPT is built on top of. And it's really interesting because we the way our company works is that we have kind of three classes of, or three departments of employees. We've got an architect, we've got our content team, and then we've got our developers. And so an architect will go out and kind of determine what information, what kind of questions we need to ask our customers or our users. And then from there, the content team kind of takes those base questions and adds a little more content, adds in reactions and that kind of stuff. And then our developers are the ones who then take that and obviously make that work in conversation. And so oftentimes we'll be using third-party APIs. One of them is weather, right? So as soon as the conversation kicks off, if we know the user's location, we may say something like, how are you doing on this cold, snowy Syracuse day? As opposed to, hey, it looks like it's a scorcher out there. I hope you've got some sunscreen on while you're talking to me. Trying to make the computer conversation feel a little bit more conversational. And one of the things that we ran into is that we have a whole conversation about hobbies. And we, ask them what their hobbies are, but there is no like fun fact API, and there is no hobbies API. And so we looked at a couple different options there and said, can we pull the second sentence of the Wikipedia page for that hobby? And sometimes you get a fun fact in there, and other times it's like completely off. We tried one API where we said, hey, one of my hobbies is swimming. And the response was like, do you know that the barracuda is the fastest swimming fish? And we're like, oh, we didn't mean that kind of swimming. And so one of the work projects we actually have, we call it a skunk works project, or a playground project, or a proof of concept project. And those are all kind of used in industry. But it was one of the ideas that our company founder had was, hey, if that ChatGPT API exists and it works, can we use that to say, instead of going to a database of pre-known fun facts about the topic, can we just query ChatGPT and say, please give me a one-sentence fun fact on the hobby of, and then just drop in whatever the user's response is, and use that as part of our conversation to relay that information. So as you guys are trying to segue that into class tonight, as you guys are learning how to build your own APIs here, that's the power of an API, is to be able to take someone's awesome code that they have spent years and years and millions of dollars developing, and taking that information and being able to integrate that into your own application or your own website or whatever it may be. It's kind of cool and empowering to know what the power of someone else's API is. Okay, we are gonna dive in tonight, but before we do, let's kick it off with stand up. What have we been doing all week? What are we learning? What light bulb moments have we had?
Well, I'm going to toot my own horn and say, I don't know if it's a light bulb, but I worked on a project last night after class, and I was looking at the code and having a really hard time following it all, but I kept at it and I had some problems, which I fixed.
Nice.
And then I got it to work. Well, I got it
Nice.
to work like up to date where we left off.
Yep. And it's really this moment of like, you're really frustrated, and this happens to me to this day with code, right? Where you're just frustrated, it's not working, you feel like you don't get it, and then all of a sudden you do get it, and you can't believe that getting it was that simple, right? Or you can't believe that you actually do get it. And that's this weird, like, you don't know how much you don't get until you do get it, and then you feel like what you didn't get was much smaller than what you thought it actually was. I don't know if that makes sense at all to anyone, or if anyone else has that same feeling. But oftentimes you feel like you're looking at 100 lines of code and you don't get 99 of them. And then all of a sudden something clicks and you get all 100 of those lines. So sometimes it's over time, sometimes it's a battle. But other times that light bulb doesn't come on a dimmer, it clicks on and it comes on in full force. And that's kind of that's a rush for me. That still happens every now and then to me when I'm writing some code, or you feel like you're battling your computer and all of a sudden you've realized you didn't just win the battle, you won the war. That is definitely something that happens pretty frequently. What else from yesterday? Were there any concepts that we learned? Anything that was kind of making sense? Any questions that popped up? We just ready to dive right on into our code? Okay. So the goal for tonight is we are going to wrap up our little adding project. We're going to get practice using fetch in our front end that we built pretty much in its entirety last night. We are going to integrate our API into our front end, and that will probably take us up until break time. And then afterwards, we will be switching over to the chat application. And we're going to learn how we can layer in our API there and integrate that information into state. So let me share my screen. I am going to just open my day 2 folder, and I'm going to keep using this code. And then when we get to the chat application, that's when I'll make my day 3 folder. If that drives you nuts and you want to make your own day 3 folder, that's okay. But because we're pretty close to the finish line here, I'm not going to split my day 2 into a day 3. So I need to open 2 things in VS Code. I'm going to open my adder folder because that is my front end. And then I'm going to take my entire day 2 folder and I'm going to open that in VS Code as well. I'm going to keep my backend code on the right, and I'm going to keep my front end code on the left. Now, important to remember that to start our React code, we need to go down in the terminal. If your terminal is not open, you can just right click on package.json and open that in your integrated terminal. But if you have your terminal open, you can go ahead and run your npm start command. That's going to pop open our front end in a tab. And then on the back end, we have to remember to start our back end server. Our code isn't actually running. It's not listening for incoming requests until we go down to the terminal in the backend code and do our npx nodemon index.js. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on that. And I should just get this starting node index.js in green with no errors. if you do run into an error and it has something to do with the port already being taken, make sure you do not have any other folders or windows open that may be running that terminal in the background. I'm also going to start 2 live shares for the front end and the back end that you can get set up at your leisure.
So the app.js, sorry, I'm gonna be honest with you, yesterday, after the break, I passed out. I fell asleep and I did not wake up. So is it for React? It's not a React, right?
It is.
Okay, all right, I'll do that. All right, thank you.
Clearly someone was not reacting to my code the second half of class.
Clearly not.
I did post it in the live stream channel last night. So if you want to just copy and paste that into like a new React project, you can do that just to kind of leapfrog you so you can follow along tonight. And then for the second half of class, we're going to start on entirely separate new backend and then reuse our chat front end. So you won't be behind on that. But
Okay.
for now, if you want to do a take whatever code is in the live stream and dump that into your app.js, that's totally fine.
Okay, thank you.
And that goes for anyone who did not get their code working from last night. Probably better to leapfrog your way up to where we were at. Does anyone need help getting either their front end or back end working, or just need another minute?
I just need a reminder. It's npx nodemon and then what?
Index.js.
App crashed. And that's in my day 2 folder, right?
Yes. Does it say why your app crashed?
Waiting for file changes before starting.
So that read up a little bit higher. Does it tell you?
Emitted error event on server instance.
Go ahead, share your screen. Let's take a look.
All. Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna request remote. And I'm gonna just hide your files over here, which will make our terminal a little bit bigger. And it is mad because 3001 is already in use. And it's already in use because we have our terminal from yesterday still hanging out here. And that's still running. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that old one. Then in our new one, I'm gonna hit Control-C to stop the server and then Up-Enter to restart it. And now you're back in business.
Oh, thank you.
So whenever you get that port in use, we've kind of been treated well with React, right? Where React will say, oh, that's in use. Do you want to run another one? And we hit Y and it goes about its day fine. But with the back end, we have to maintain that and say, hey, we're going to be the ones making sure nothing else is running on that port. There are some side effects of a back end changing ports unexpectedly. And we're going to see that in a minute in our front end. So if you get that error address in use already, it just means somewhere else in some terminal, whether it's in VS Code or in another terminal window, you've got that something running on that port already.
Okay.
All right, so we are going to dive in. Where we left off was our front end had 2 number inputs, and we went through this whole flow to not only have our inputs and our button here, but to link up our onClick and to also link our num1 and num2 inputs into state using value and onChange, and then we used our useState up here. What all of that work allowed us to do was to say, hey, when I type in 2 and 3, if I have my console open and hit add them up, I can see 2 and 3 are the two numbers that got typed in. So we are going to go through all three endpoints, all three methods that it took that we practiced with to get data in to the backend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my button clicked. I've got my num1 and my num2. I am targeting this data endpoint. This is the first one that I want to use to get the sum of those two numbers out. What function do we use on the front end in order to make an API request?
Fetch.
Fetch. So we are going to, I always prefer async and await over promises. So you'll see my code using async and await. Just keep in mind that you can always use a promise with .then if that syntax makes more sense to you. So I'm going to say const response equals and await fetch. And now VS Code yells at me immediately and says, you can't use await unless you tell it this function is going to happen asynchronously. So we add in our async keyword, then we can use our await. And now it's like, okay, where do you want to fetch to? Well, I'm going to use a template literal in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to fetch to HTTP. I'm going to my local host. I'm staying on this computer. And then I need to specify what port it's going to. That port is going to go to 3001 because we've got our listen to 3001 down here. Now I need to keep going there. How did I send the information, the num1 and num2, into this endpoint in my backend? I use the query params. That means that in my URL, I need my /data because that data is part of the route over here to line those two up. And then I'm going to do a question mark because query params always are in a following a question mark. And I'm going to say num1 equals, then I'm going to pull up my template literal and say num1 and my num2 equals my num2. What this is doing, I'm trying to, it's a little bit bigger for you guys so you can see it. I am putting in my query params after the question mark. My key that I'm using here is lining up with the same key that I'm using in this section of my backend code. And then this num1, where's this num1 coming from? It's actually coming from my state. Now, whatever comes back from my response is going to be is going to come back as JSON, right? We're sending an object here that Express is automatically turning in to a JSON string for us, our JavaScript object notation. So what we're going to do is we're going to await our response.json. And then finally, we're going to console log out our data. So we've got all of that in there. We go back. You have a question? No, okay, sorry. We go over to our browser. We have our 2 and our 3 entered, or any numbers. We click add them up, and we get all of this red in the console. And we're like, ooh boy. All right, let's scroll up here and see what's going on. the first error that I get says access to fetch at data, right? This is my whole URL that I'm sending in from origin localhost 3000 has been blocked by cores. Well, what you talking about, Willis? That's localhost and localhost. Cores not only applies to the domain that you're accessing, it also applies to the port. So because our React is on 3001 and our backend is on 3000, I'm sorry, is on 3000 here and 3001 here, those are two different ports. And so our Express server is saying, only traffic from 3001 is allowed to access my API. We're like, well, no, we kind of do want to allow our cross-origin requests in. And when we're building an API, oftentimes we specifically want that cross-origin resource sharing on, right? We want other people to be able to access our own API. So what we need to do is we need to configure our Express server to say, you know what, cores is actually allowed. The way we do that is we come down to our terminal here. We can't install any new NPM packages if our server is still running. So what we do is we come down to our backend terminal and we hit Control-C, Control not Command, Control-C to stop it. Once we have that server stopped, we are going to npm install cores, C-O-R-S. Go ahead and hit enter on that. If you do not get any input and get a blank line, that means you forgot to hit Control-C to stop your server before you can install that. So we do our npm install cores. And if all of that goes through, before we forget, before we use cores anywhere, let's go ahead and run our npx nodemon index.js before we forget. So we're going to fire our server back up. And then we need to tell Express, hey, not only do we want to import cores, we want to allow any cores requests to be used. So what we do is we come up to the top and we're going to add import cores from cores.
Hey, Max, real quick, could you put your screen on maybe a bit so you can see the whole terminal? Thanks.
Yes. And the command we ran there was npm install cores, but we Controlled-C out of the terminal first. We typed in npm install cores and hit enter. We waited for that to run. Then we hit up twice or typed in our npx nodemon index.js and hit enter, and that rebooted the server for us. So we import our cores from that package called cores, but that isn't enough. That's just letting our code know that we have access to that package called cores. Now we need to tell our Express server to actually use cores. So we do that just like we use our JSON parser. We say server.use cores.
Max, I want to go backwards for just a second and look at the adder code.
Mhm.
Thank you. I think I got something mixed up.
Let me try and arrange these in a way that we can have both of them on the screen. There you go.
Thank you.
Brendan, go ahead.
On my adder file, the But it's telling me that there's an error with await, but I have it exactly like how you do, so I think, am I missing async? There we go, that's what I missed, thank you.
No problem. All right, if our cores is working, we can go back to the browser. I'm going to hit this little do not enter sign in here. That just clears out the console for me because I think we should have resolved that issue. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that clear button. I'm going to go back and I'm going to hit my atom up button and look what I got in my console. Hello world. Hey, that lines up with my hello world here. And my sum is coming in as 5. That's pretty nifty. And to prove all of this is working, we can actually go into the network tab. And inside this network tab, here is our 200. We see our cores error that didn't work before. But now in this network tab, if we click on that last one, we can go, the headers tab should be the first one that opens. And it's giving us all the details about what happened in that fetch. We used the request method get. The response from our API server was 200. We can see the request URL, and we can even see in our payload, this is the query string that it provided. And then if we go into our preview, we can see the response, or the response itself. We can see the raw JSON that's coming back. Okay, nifty. Let's go back to our VS Code. Now I've got it logging out in my console, but I would like the user to be able to see the result of all of our hard work. How can I take the data that's coming back from my API call and make it so the user can easily see it?
Put it in state.
Put it in state. So we're going to make a new variable, const sum, and set sum is going to be our use state. And we're going to start that out as empty. We are then going to come down here and say, I want to set my sum to the data.sum. Where's my data coming from? My data is coming from the response JSON. Where's my sum coming from? That is a key inside of my backend. And finally, we need to be able to show the user that sum. So I'm going to say sum is going to show my sum. So I go back over to the browser. 3 lines that we added were line 8 here. We initialized a new variable in state. We use our set sum to use our data.sum. And then finally, we, in our interface, say sum needs to show up. So we give it a little label, and then we use our JSX syntax to show that value in state. So I'm going to go back to my browser. I'm going to type in 2 numbers, hit atom up, and get 6.
Do you have a live share going?
I do for both my front end and back end.
Okay, thanks.
Just in a sharing mood tonight.
There it is.
How we feeling? We feeling like this is clicking? We're seeing our front end or back end. We're seeing how this kind of all meshes in with React. We've got Ryan's module coming back with fetch and async and await. We've got our React state concepts integrating in here.
Just kind of a general question is, so in this, with in the case of the sum in the set sum state, we didn't like set like a string, or it was just completely empty. Is that for any particular reason, or?
No, if we wanted to, we could do something like we could use an inline ternary, and we could say if sum exists, then show a p tag with the sum in it. Otherwise, just show an empty string. That's an inline ternary in React. And what that would allow us to do is say, hey, when there is no sum, show nothing. But when once we do have a sum, go ahead and display it down here. So that's a benefit of not starting it out as anything. We can just do a check to say, hey, if it's empty, then don't show anything. Otherwise, show not only the label sum, but the actual number as well. And so that is a common approach to API calls, is to say, hey, if the API call hasn't been made yet, if we don't have the results, don't show anything. But if we do have the sum, then make this thing show up. There's also a shorthand for that. If the ternary makes sense to you, you can actually use a concept called short circuiting to say, hey, if the sum doesn't exist, nothing will show up. But if the sum does exist, then make whatever this value is show up. So this is a shorthand due to some under the hood JavaScript reason. But that is a good shortcut for, hey, if the sum exists, then this is the value that I want to show up. Otherwise, nothing shows up.
Got it. I kind of see the logic in it. And all right, thank you. That was a great example. Appreciate it.
No problem. Okay, anyone need help before we move on to our other methods?
Yeah, I'm not really sure where to start though. I'm kind of backwards here.
Want to share your screen?
Yes, please. So I'm a little behind as I was looking at this. Does it not like my async or my await?
It's exactly your problem. What's the one rule before we can use await? What do we need to do?
Does it need the async? Is that what it's missing?
It needs the async. Yep, up on line 11.
Oh,
So the async always goes in the function that the await is used in. So before you're opening and closing parentheses there, you need to put in the keyword async.
Here?
Right on the other side of that. On the left side of it. No.
Here.
Yep.
Okay. I haven't got my windows sorted out to look at your code yet. So I was like lost.
And so now that should show the sum result in your console.
I will take a look now that that part's sorted. Thank you. All right. I don't want to hold you up, so.
No problem.
Continue. Thank you.
Anyone else need help before we roll forward here? Okay, rolling forward then. So we're going to reuse our button clicked here because we need to practice using our route parameters and our post parameters. But that interface, we're kind of going to reuse, right? At the end of the day, we're just adding two numbers together. So to make it a little bit easier to understand, hey, we're doing this same idea just 3 times over, I'm going to rename my button clicked to button clicked query. Then I'm going to come down here and that function isn't going to get used. But what is going to get used is our new button clicked. And this is going to end up being our route params. And then we'll redo that. We'll put the word route in it and then hook it up to our last add as our final example. So in other words, we're writing 3 functions. Only one of them is going to get hooked up to the button at a time. Whatever one is called button clicked is the one that's actually going to run. But for the sake of having our code and being able to reference it, we're going to leave the old ones in there. Okay, so I know I'm going to need my async right off the bat because I'm using fetch. Whenever I use fetch, I know I'm going to need an await. If I use an await, I know I'm going to need an async. I'm still going to do my const response. It's still going to await a fetch. It's still going to go to localhost 3001. Except this time, instead of putting in my num1, I'm going to put in a slash and drop. I should have used a template literal here instead of quotes. So if you have quotes in, abort, change them out to backticks. We need our template literal. We need our $ curly braces in here. So now that I've got my backticks here and here, I can drop in my num1 and I can put a slash in after the curly brace. That slash is going to line up with this slash right here. I am then going to drop in my num2. And then, believe it or not, the data and the set sum are going to be exactly the same from our button clicked. Why? Because look at what we're sending back. We're sending back the sum here from our first one. That sum is also getting sent back in the exact same format. So even though the input has changed as to how we're sending our data to our backend, the output, it remains the same because our backend is consistent by sending back that same key called sum. So I'm going to save that. And if everything goes well, in theory, I can change these numbers and hit add them up, and I still get my sum working here. You guys a minute to catch up on that, and then we'll go into our third example.
We should see the sum just in the front screen, correct?
Correct.
Can you refresh my memory on how we can, oh, nope, never mind, just kidding.
Everyone good? Anyone need help? If everything is working, this function should work exactly the same as this function. We're just practicing lining up the way we send our data into the backend. This time was with our route parameters. First time was with our query parameters. This next time is going to get a little more fun. As if we weren't already having a blast. Okay. Last call for questions.
I was caught up. Maybe.
Okay. So I'm going to rename my button clicked one final time, and I'm going to call this button clicked route. And I'm going to make one new const button clicked. And it's still going to need an async because it's got our fetch in it. And I'm just going to leave a comment in here that this is our post body. Now we're going to still do our const response. We're still going to await our fetch. We're still going to go to our localhost 3001. And we're still going to go to add. But this time, it's not the only piece of information that we're going to put in our fetch parameters. Fetch also takes an object as a second parameter, where it allows us to specify the details of what we want to fetch and what methods we want to use, basically what options we can modify the fetch with. The first thing we need to do is say, hey, the method we're going to use is post. That is going to make our post over here line up with the post request we're making. Now, we also want to include our body, and our body needs to be stringified. We cannot send information over the internet as an object. We need to stringify it so that when it receives on the back end, it can parse it out. If you pass an object directly into this body, all kinds of weird stuff happens. So we're going to stringify our num1 and our num2 from state. The problem here is even though we're stringifying it, we have to give our backend a heads up that what we're sending in is JSON. Yes, it's JSON, and yes, the server can look at that and say, well, this follows JavaScript object notation, but we need to explicitly tell the server, hey, we're going to send you some JSON in the body. What API or HTTP concept can we use to provide context to the backend server about our request? Where do we put information about our request that isn't directly in the body?
In the parameters or the URL?
We could. The headers are what we use to tell the server, hey, here's some additional information about this request. And in the headers, we can put something called the content type. And we're going to say the content type is application JSON. What this is doing is because the headers are telling the server, hey, whatever is in our body is JSON, this line, or those two lines, are what is going to trigger our express.json over here to parse it out. So even though we're stringifying using JSON, we also need to tell fetch that when it sends this information to the backend in the body, also tell the backend in the headers of the request, hey, this is JSON coming in. Because we do that, that is going to trigger this express.json over here to parse out our content into JavaScript objects using our JavaScript object notation. If all of that works, we get to reuse the last two lines of our function. We get to const data our response.json and set the sum to the data.sum. If all of that works, I can go back over to my browser. I can type something in like -8 and 6 and hit add them up. And I get -86. That is not what I was hoping for. But we'll dive into that in a second. All of your code is working. You should be able to put two inputs in, hit add them up, and get a concatenated string, not the actual sum of the two of them. So let's dive into why this isn't working. I'm going to go back to my network tab. I'm going to go to my bottom one, and you may see something in here that says pre-flight. We almost never want to look at the pre-flight information. The pre-flight is basically opening a connection with the server in order to make our actual API call go faster. The actual API call is actually right above it. So I'm going to pop that open, and I'm going to go to the headers section. Now, if we scroll down in our headers, we can see our content type did get set to application JSON. Okay, that's nice. I'm going to go down to my payload, payload is in another tab. And now we see our object that got sent, our num1 and our num2. But we also know that -8 and 6 aren't actually numbers. They are strings. Well, that's not ideal. Where is that string coming from? That string is coming from our inputs, because inputs, even though they are set to type number, HTML always gives our input values as a string. So we have two options. We can either parse that number on the front end, or we can parse that number on the back end. I'm going to do it on the back end because we've done everything else on the back end so far. I'm going to parse my int here. And I'm also going to parse my other number. Save that. I'm going to just see, will Prettier let me do that? No, it will not. So I will try and make this a little bit bigger. Now, if I go back to my Chrome and hit add 'em up, I get my -2 and I'm good to go. Parse int does handle negative numbers, by the way. I'm going to stop there to poll just to see where you guys are at. At this point, we should have 3 separate functions, and those functions should be adding our numbers together in all 3 of them. I'm going to leave this up on the code. Brandon.
Got a fun series of errors that popped up. Let me see here. Oh,
Whoa, how'd you get into FS?
I don't know. Like before, what was this? It was before you added before you had the sum of like -86. All this just came up, and I was like, all right. I don't know if I.
Okay, so you've got import JSON from Express here, and you've got some other import. I believe both of those came in from an autocomplete that you did not want to autocomplete.
Yeah, one
Um,
of these is familiar.
So I'm gonna just take both of those out, and I think that should fix it on the front end. And yeah, you're good to go.
Thank you.
Give everyone another minute. We're waiting for a couple more votes in the poll, and then we will keep going here. use this time to go back through our code, make sure you understand the flow of it. For the first time, we're making our full stack API calls. So we are essentially reaching out over the internet, even though we're using localhost, and accessing an entirely separate, different section of our code in order to get the data that we're looking for. Yes, I am well aware that this is overkill, and we could have added those two numbers together on the front end in our React code. However, these three methods represent the three major ways we can send input from our front end into our back end. The most common one that we will be using is that post method, because it's the most powerful, because we can send objects and arrays and different data types in it. With that said, query parameters are very frequently used in APIs as well. Those route parameters are used, not as much as the other two. Those route parameters are helpful when we say, hey, we want to get a specific ID from the database. So we want to go get our games, right? And so we would say /games/9 if 9 was the ID of the game in the database. And that would use the route parameter in order to return the information about that game. All right, I think almost everyone has voted in. Does anyone else need help before we kind of put this code off to the side and get our chat app set up? All right. So we are headed to week 13, day 4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close out of all of my ad stuff. When I close that window, it will also automatically close the terminal for me and release port 3000 for our front end and 3001 for our back end. So just keep in mind that you want to close that out, or at least close the terminal out, so that you can release that port 3001 so we can reuse that port for a different project. So
You're not sharing your screen.
I'm going to go to my code. I am going back in the time machine to week 13, day 4. That has our chat app in it. Now, our node modules for this are going to be huge because I have React installed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete out my node modules folder. I'm going to hit Command Delete, make sure it's only the node modules folder, not your entire app. I'm going to right click on chat and I'm going to go down to copy. And I'm going to go back to my week 18. I am now going to make my day 3 folder. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in my chat. But this isn't a great label because our chat is about to become full stack. So I'm going to rename my chat to chat-frontend. The reason I'm using a dash there is because file paths with spaces in them make developers insane. So go ahead and use a dash or an underscore instead of a space in there. That will make your life easier down the road. I'm going to grab my chat front end and I'm going to drag that in to my VS Code. I am then going to right click and open in my integrated terminal. And because we deleted our node modules from that other folder, we need to reinstall them. So we're going to run the command npm install and hit enter. To recap there, we went to our week 13, our day 4. We opened the chat folder and we deleted our node modules. We then copied that chat folder, went to week 18. We made our day 3 folder. We pasted in that folder and we renamed it to chat-frontend. We then opened that in VS Code. We opened our integrated terminal. We ran npm install. We let that finish up. And then finally, the last step is we run npm start, and that should fire up our chat app as we left it off. also going to start a live share, and I'm going to give you guys a minute to catch up on that, and then we will get our backend set up next.
Max, I know you just said it like a second time, but could you please talk me through that again? I have got my chat open. I deleted,
The node modules.
yep.
You're going to right click on that in the week 13 folder and hit copy.
Which am I clicking on, the chat folder?
The chat folder, yes.
Okay. Copy. And then I have to go into my
Week 18
Mhm.
and make a day 3 folder.
Okay, yep, that one. And then there, I need to make a new folder inside of day 3.
In day 3, you don't need a new folder. You can paste the entire chat folder.
Okay.
Now you are going to open that in VS Code. You might want to rename it to chat-frontend. Sorry, I forgot that step.
All right, thank you. Okay, and then I can just drag chat folder, chat
Mhm.
front folder.
Into VS Code. You're going to right click and open in integrated terminal. And then in that terminal, you're going to run npm install and hit enter, and then type in npm start and hit enter, and then you'll be all caught up.
Okay, almost. Didn't like me. Okay, I've got day 3 folder, chat front end open in VS Code. Sorry, I'm behind, so I'm flustered.
I'm going to roll forward just for the sake of class. If you need help, Latonia has created more React front end and back ends than I can probably even count. So if you need help, just shoot her a message and you two can go in a breakout room if you need it.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so in order to get our back end started, we need to, we need to use the terminal for that. Our backends tend to be more terminal heavy. So we're going to pop open our terminal. I'm going to type in CD and a space. Then I'm going to grab my day 3 folder and drag that over. I hit enter, and that should change our working directory to day 3. So if I run pwd enter, I should see my week 18 day 3 folder. From there, I need to make a new directory, because when we run create React app, it makes the folder for us. But when we're making our full stack backend folders, we need to make that ourselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to do mkdir, stands for make directory. And then we are going to say, hey, I am going to make my chat backend. Going to hit enter on that. And if you happen to have your Finder open, you'll see that made our chat backend folder. But before we can init our backend, we need to make sure we're in that folder that we just created. So we're going to cd into chat backend and hit enter. And just to make sure that we're all in the right spot, if I do a pwd, I can see that I've made it all the way down into my chat backend folder. So there are 2 commands I'm going to run here. npm init -y. Make sure you've got a lowercase y there. npm space init space -y. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And that made my package.json file for me. Now that I have my package.json file, there are two things that I'm going to install that I know I'm going to need right off the bat. I'm going to need Express, and I am also going to need cores. So we're going to npm install Express space cores. npm install Express and cores. Go ahead and hit enter on that. And while that's running, I'm going to go ahead and copy that command into the live stream so you have it. That is in the Slack live stream if it's easier to read it there. If you're a little bit behind, that's okay. We are then going to take our chat backend folder and we're going to drag that into VS Code as well. Now we should have our chat front end on the left and our package.json on the right. I'm going to also start a live share for this, in case you would like to open that up. We are going to right click new file. We're going to call this server.js this time. I have seen both index.js and server.js. I do not think there is an industry preference. So I'm just going to shake it up and call it server.js. And now we need to get our Express server up and running. So we go to our package.json and we say, hey, the type is going to be module. That's going to allow us to use our newer import types in our code. So in our package.json, pretty much anywhere except inside the scripts or dependencies, you can put your type module in here. You know, these are a lot of little steps, but missing one of them can be disastrous. So if anyone is either behind now and needs help or got lost at a step. Exona.
I got lost in the beginning.
Okay. The beginning of the backend setup?
Yes.
Okay.
Chat backend.
Share
So-
your screen. Where are you at?
I'm at the terminal.
Okay.
I just created the file, if that
Okay.
makes it easier.
Yep, that's fine. CD and space, and then grab that and drag in the path and hit enter. Now we are going to npm space init space -y, lowercase, and enter. And that, if you notice in the background, created your package.json file for you. Which is what it was supposed to do. So now we're going to npm install Express and cores.
Express,
Space cores.
just
Not
like that.
sponsored. Yep. Go ahead. Hit enter.
Okay.
From there, go ahead and grab your chat backend and drag that into VS Code. In your package.json, you're going to put, yep, there's fine, do quote and say type. And then colon outside of it and module. Don't forget your comma at the end of that line. Now save, and we're going to make a new file called server.js. And hit enter. You're officially caught up.
Thank you.
Hopefully that recap was helpful for someone else as well.
So we're gonna need only a live share for the backend.
No, I do have a live share for the front end. It was posted at 6:37.
Max, for the backend, was the only thing that happened was that the type was added?
For the
In the
package.json, yes, and we
Okay.
need server.js and installed Express in cores.
Oh, okay, okay.
And those commands are in the live stream as well. Anyone else need help?
The very last step was we made a new file named,
Server.js, but we did not put anything in it.
okay, and then, okay, I'm back in, thank you.
All right, we're gonna get our base server set up, and then we will take our break. So in server.js, we need to import Express from Express. And while we're at it, we're also going to import cores from cores. We are then going to make our server by using our Express that we imported. And we're going to tell our server to use our cores that we imported. By default, we are going to say server.get, our empty slash, gets a rec and a res, the request and the response. And we're going to res.send hello. Then finally, we need to tell our server to listen on port 3001. However, last time we did this, we didn't really have anything in our console. We didn't know if the server had successfully started up. What we can actually do is provide a second parameter to our server.listen that is a function. And inside that function, we can put something like server is running on port 3001. That way, if we get this message, it means everything else has worked. If we don't see this message in our terminal, chances are something went wrong either with the port 3001 or something with our code above it. So we go over to our server.js, we open an integrated terminal, we run our npx nodemon, and this time it's going to be server.js instead of index.js. And when we hit enter, we should get our server running on port 3001. Now, I like to call my computer a liar all of the time. In order to prove that it is working on port 3001, we're going to go to Chrome. We're going to open up a new tab for 3001. We get our hello showing up. You are good to go on break. Be back at 7:20. Stick around for at least the next 10 minutes in case anyone has issues getting their hello to show up in their browser. Remember to go to 3001, not 3000.
Maxwell, did you say was the break time, end time?
7:20.
Thank you.
Guessing it's going to take everyone at least 5 minutes to catch up to where I'm at.
I need help.
Shoot.
Mine is not registering, so I don't know what. Maybe I have a syntax error.
You have to start it in the terminal. So right click on that.
On the JSON?
It doesn't matter. And you're going to npx nodemon server.js. And Y enter. Now you've got not only your lovely servers running on port 3001 message, but if you refresh in the browser, you're all caught up and can go on break.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I'm going on break. Resume recording. Okay. So we've got our backend server set up, and we need to kind of revisit our messages here, right? So we've got this thing that says received, and I can type a message in here and hit send, and it shows up here. But what happens if I open this in another browser? I don't see my sent message. Wouldn't it be nice if every time we sent a message, it would show up on the server, and then if someone else loaded this web page, they would be able to see those same messages. That's what we're going to dive into. So to get started here, I want to keep track of my messages on the back end, on that server, right? So, and I know there are going to be multiple messages. So I'm going to say let messages equal an empty array. And what I want to do is I want to have some starter message saved in, just like this starter message over here when we hit refresh and that message starts out there. I'm going to use that same thing. So I'm going to go back to my front end code. I'm going to go to my app.js. And here is this array of messages. So I'm going to just take this received message, copy that same thing, and because we're using front end on both, because we're using JavaScript on both our front end and back end, we're able to, to use that exact same syntax in our back end code. So I do my let messages, and I have my first object inside that array. Now, I need some way to be able to access these messages on our front end. In order to pull that off, I'm going to say, hey, server, allow a GET request to get my messages. And when that request comes in, what I would like you to do is in the response, send back the messages. Now, I'm going to go to my front end, and you guys may be tempted to put a fetch right in here. However, we almost never want to do a fetch that isn't part of a use effect or some on click or on submit. The reasoning behind that is anytime this app re-renders, every time we type in a different letter, it's going to rerun the code out here to get down to the return. We don't want it to do that. We only want this fetch to run the first time this component shows up. So we're going to use a use effect for that. And what we're going to do is specify, hey, this should only run when the component first shows up. That's what this comma and the empty array is doing, is it's saying this should only run when the component first loads. Now, what do we want it to do when the component first loads? We want it to make an API call. And that's going to be an async function because we need our await. And then we are going to make our API call down here. Oops, forgot my arrow syntax. Everyone a minute to catch up on that. So now that I've got all of the guts in there, now I can actually make my call. So I can say const response is await to my fetch. I'm going to do my localhost 3001, and I'm going to go get my messages. Now you may be asking me, Max, why don't we need to put method get in there? Because fetch defaults to a get request, just like our web browser defaults to a get request. So we would put our comma and our object in here and provide other options if we needed our to change our method or include a body or to put headers in. all different things that we can put in those options. But because we're using that default get request, we do not need any additional options in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our data by awaiting our response.json parse, and then we're going to console log out our data. And if everything works, when we switch over to the browser and pop open our console, we should see an object. And inside that object, we have messages, and inside those messages is our array from the backend. So the last step we need to do in our code before I open up a poll is all we're going to do is we're going to set our messages. What set messages doing? That's integrating our state. So we're going to set our messages to the data.messages. And if all of that works, we should be able to go to our backend, modify the text, hit save, and when we go over to our front end and refresh, we get a really nasty error. Messages timestamp get time is not a function. Let's see if this fixes it. Okay. In order to fix that error, you're going to open up your messages list, and you should have two keys, one for sent message and one for the received message. Go ahead and remove the .get time. And if all of that is working, your output should be your receive from backend. So the majority of the code that we've done here is all in this use effect. Don't forget to make sure you're importing your use effect from React. Most of the code is all in here. The only piece of the code that isn't is going to be over in our messages list. When you have your keys, remove the .get time that is on the end of it. And if all of that works, you should be able to see whatever message text is in your backend showing up as a message, and there should be no errors in your console. And I'm going to start a poll. Anyone got lost at a certain step, just let me know and I can repeat that section. Xena, you are muted.
I don't think my data is correct. I don't know where I went wrong, but it's showing me like errors, if you don't mind.
Go for it. Okay, so where does the red start on your backend? Yep. So right before that, what looks wrong?
Oh, the quote.
Mm-hmm. Where is it supposed to be?
Should there be a, sorry.
Mm.
I don't know.
Okay,
No.
look at where the quote is on 9.
Oh, on just the messages?
Mm-hmm. And then take that extra quote out and save that. And now your server is still mad at you because you are removing an event listener.
Right here.
No,
On here, on this server,
read your code from top to bottom.
import, express cons, server express, server dead. Okay, server dot get. Oh, did I close it? Yeah,
Next line,
remove event listener, send.
that
So
should
what
be
do
res.
Oh, this should be res?
Res.send messages, not remove event listener.
Oh,
Your autocomplete ran away from you.
okay, cool.
And now you are missing a closing parenthesis on 15. And hopefully when you save, you're now back in business.
Okay, but as far as this, first of all, I think my use effect is all good.
It is, except for scroll up in your terminal a little bit. You have a use effect is not defined in your terminal in there. How do we solve a use effect is not defined? Okay. And now it is mad about
18.
In messages list.
I have a bunch of it.
Okay.
Yes.
Where's your first red squiggly?
This one.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, right here.
Mm-hmm.
So just remove that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Save.
And
Okay,
then-
one last issue on 28.
Props.
That should just say message. Take out the props part.
Message.text.
That I don't think I think that was broken before you got into class tonight.
Probably.
That one in particular. Okay, now you should be in business. If you switch over to your front end and refresh, you're good to go.
Thank you.
I'm going to start doing that more for everyone, right? Instead of just saying, hey, you have an extra parenthesis, say, where's the first red squiggly? Or what's that error message trying to tell you, right? Because we're getting more and more practice with debugging, which is just a part of being a developer. Spend 90% of your time debugging and 10% of your time writing new code that you can debug. Brandon, go for it.
What was the section that you said that we needed to remove? I missed that. It was in messages list.
In messages list, there are two keys here and here. You need to remove the .to date or to something. It should just be message.timestamp for both keys.
Gotcha. Thank you.
That's due to a data format issue with the timestamp coming in. Anyone needs help, let me know. We don't have a ton of votes in the poll.
Okay. I have a question. I missed a decent chunk. Something happened with my internet connection, and so I probably missed about I feel like 5-6 minutes of after break. So basically I feel like I'm all caught up, but hold on. There's a in app.js, there's a use effect,
Mhm.
right? That includes somewhere there's a console.log of the data. And since it's a use effect with an empty array, I'm assuming that that function runs as soon as the page loads, right?
Correct.
But I don't see any data in the console.
share
when it
your screen.
runs.
Did you
Okay.
make do you have line 26 on mine? When you make the make API call function, do you actually call it in the use effect?
Yeah, it's like it's pretty much like verbatim what you have in there.
Okay, share your screen. Let's take a
So
look.
okay, give me one sec.
Did you also add the server.get messages to your backend?
Server.get. Let me see. Let me just make sure. Yeah, I have the server.get messages. I have the response.send.
Okay, then
For
just share your
messages
screen. Let's
object.
take a look.
Okay. 1 second. I think it's this one. Oh, this is all right. Hold on.
And you're looking in your browser console for the console log, right?
What was that?
You're looking in your browser console for the console log?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking in the browser. So, okay, is that it? I don't know why I'm
This
so
is
bad at this sharing thing.
just your chat backend.
Chat backend. I need the chat front end. Okay. So I gotta stop sharing. I'm sorry. I'm so bad at this. I don't know why.
If you can just share the whole desktop screen, then that's easier.
How do I do that? Oh, just say
When
desktop.
desktop 1 or desktop 2.
Okay. All right, and I'll just drag it over then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Make API call, use effect, messages. Okay, I don't see any issues there. Can you drag over your browser?
Backend. Browser. Okay.
Oh, you're in 3001. We want to be in 3000.
Oh. Okay.
There's your messages.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No problem. You made the mistake.
Okay.
Someone else probably will as well. Localhost 3001 is our backend, right? That's just the API that's just giving us the data. 3000 is our front end where we are accessing 3001 through our fetch request, but 3000 is our React front end. That's where our console logs are going to show up. Those particular console logs, because backend console logs would show up in the backend terminal. All right, the sure did votes are creeping up. Anyone? Can I help anyone? Senator, were you talking to us?
Yeah, I was asking, do you want to catch me up on the full hour?
You sound like you're talking to me through a tin can on the other side of the country.
All right, let me switch my mic.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who heard that.
You sounded like he was underwater.
Yeah. We make fun of the sales guy at our company because he's on a Microsoft computer, and our company, like everyone we hire, is a Mac fanboy and always has Apple products, and he just never lives down the fact that he doesn't have a Mac. Anyone else need help that is not underwater before we move forward?
Yeah, it looks like Snyder said it sounds like he's not like in a quiet environment. So I asked him if he wanted to type out the question or something. He might the background sound might be like muffling his voice.
Could be.
Max, I had a question about the get time. Is that something that's going to be replaced with another function? And then didn't someone the other day say that their time was off by like 6 or 12 hours? Did that have
I
anything
didn't see
to
that.
do? Someone in class I thought shared that their time was off by like a day or half a day. And I was just wondering if
That was separate.
related.
That
okay.
was Schneider was looking at the API calls for the forecast data, and he couldn't figure out why the data was starting with tomorrow instead of today. That was just the way the forecast was set up to say like, hey, we won't predict any weather in the next 6 hours. We'll only predict weather 12 hours and further out. So that's why the times were off a little bit. The other thing is that get time. Basically what's happening is when that data gets sent over the internet, this date object is getting converted to a string, and because of that we can't use the get time function on a string. And so we could go through and modify our timestamps, and if I remember towards the end of this project we'll go through that. But by the time we get it in the database, we're going to have a different solution for getting that time to work.
I'd have posted something in the chat. So
I saw. Yes, thank you. Anyone else need help before we roll forward here? Okay.
Sorry, before class ends, and I will forget if I don't mention it now, I'm gonna need your help with a file that I can't seem to open up.
Okay, no problem. Speaking of tangents, thank you for tangenting. There is a poll in Slack. I will post a link in the Zoom chat just in case. Based off of the results of that poll so far, I'm pretty sure I know what the outcome is going to be, but I'm going to share it with you guys anyway, because we run mostly on a democracy, unless I think it's a bad idea, and then we definitely don't run on a democracy. There is an opportunity for some resume reviews by a technical recruiter from Paramount, and this is through the Erie 21 program with Lemoyne, and you guys being a Lot 4 student. So based off of the results of that poll, what we'll probably do is meet here at 5:30, our normal time. We will have Taylor come in and just give you guys a rundown of all the different events that are coming down the pipeline for Lock 4. She'll kind of come in as guest speaker, so to speak. She's going to give you a rundown on all of that information. We will get our servers set up and running, and then we will take a break at 6 p.m. We'll switch over to the Zoom link for the resume review. Even if you don't want your resume reviewed, you'll still want to sit in on that class, because they will have advice for other people that you may want to integrate into your resume as well. I believe it's only going to be Lock 4 students, so it's going to be people in non-traditional classrooms, whether that is cohort 3 or cohort 4 potential graduate of the program, or it's a certificate program student. They're going to be going through reviewing resumes. If you have a resume, even if you don't think it is finalized, I would recommend that you submit it to be reviewed, only because feedback is super important with resumes, and you may have one person say, I think this is a terrible idea. You should never use bullet points on your resume. Everything should be a sentence, and here's why. And you can have another recruiter pull up your resume and go, I hate sentences. I want everything to be bullets, and here's why. And it's ultimately going to be up to you to decide which one of them you agree with more. And so the more people you have give you feedback on your resume, the closer you can get your resume to being what's most important, actually landing you a job, right? So I would highly encourage everyone to submit their resume if they have a resume to submit. It will not be a requirement for sitting in on the call and listening. But just based off of the 8 people who have said yes and the no one who has been bold enough to say, no, I don't really want to do that. There is a Zoom meeting registration link in the message underneath mine. I'm actually going to fill it out right now before I forget, so I can get the Zoom link. I'm going to ask all of you guys to fill it out as well, just so they know how many people are attending the event. That Zoom link is in the registration link is in Slack, and I will also post it in the Zoom chat as well. So we will meet here at 5:30. Taylor's going to give you a rundown of all the upcoming Lock 4 events. We're going to get our servers all set and up and running. At 6 p.m., we'll switch over to the resume review. Taylor said that should probably be about an hour. We will take our break at 7 p.m. And then when we come back, we'll dive into the regular second half of class. Any questions on tomorrow?
So that link that we just get, should we just copy it somewhere or?
The link for the meeting after you register, yes, I will share that link out with you guys because everyone will have to switch over to that link. There's no way for me to like merge this Zoom meeting into that Zoom meeting. But you should save it. I'll send it out tomorrow just in case, but yes, go ahead and save that or add it to your calendar as a reminder. Everyone fill out that registration link. We good to move forward? Okay, let me do one.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Another tangent. I received an email yesterday from Jesse about computers. Did you discuss that?
I did during class. There should be a link in that email to fill out that form. The second most important step after filling out that form is to shoot Jesse a message and let him know that you filled it out, whether it's on Slack or in an email. And then Jesse will start counting people who have not filled out that form. It is an all or nothing deal, unfortunately. It means everyone who wants to keep their computer has to fill out the form or no one can keep their computer. Last cohort, there was one student in particular who I swear was going to drive to people's houses and choke them if they did not fill out the form. So definitely fill it out if you haven't already, and shoot Jesse a message, and then Jesse will have an update for you sometime around the 10th to let you know that the paperwork's finalized and that it's a done deal and you get to keep your laptops at graduation.
Is there like a date by which we should have this in, or?
Definitely by the 10th, but the sooner the better.
Okay.
I know there are a couple questions on it and you may like need to look up some numbers from your tax return, but it's secure and we've worked with these guys for this cohort and the previous 2 cohorts, and they're all grant funded as well. So they're legit. And Jesse will also have details on where you can either send a thank you email or a thank you card once all the paperwork gets finalized. Okay, diving back in. So we've got our messages showing up here. What's the next logical thing that you think we should be working on?
On the input.
On the input. When we type something in here and type ABC and hit send, that shows up here, but as soon as I refresh the page, it disappears. And something interesting happened when I typed ABC and hit send. Look what happened to my message up here. I hit send. Oh, no, it doesn't. Anyway, we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so what's happening here? We need to go find where this send is. So I'm going to go to my VS Code and I'm going to meander my way down here. So I see, hey, I've got my message input here. I'm going to go ahead and open that component by holding in Command and clicking on the name of the component. That will automatically open my message input file for me. Now I'm in here and I've got my form submitted and I say event prevent default. That's good. I still want to prevent the default. I take my current messages and I make a copy of the messages from my props. Then I take whatever my current messages are and I push in the new message text. Then I clear out my message input and I use the set messages state update coming in through my props to put in the updated messages. Okay, that's great, but I don't just want my messages in state anymore. I want to send this information to the backend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to my server.js and I'm going to make a server.post message. Notice I did not put an S in there. I am not posting multiple messages. I'm posting one message. So naming convention says I should not put an S in the route. I'm going to have my rec and res. And I am going to messages.push. Okay, my messages array here is here. What am I going to push into it? I don't know. We haven't really decided yet. How am I going to get the information from my front end and put it over here into my back end? Well, because I've got my post going on, I can probably just messages.push whatever is in my rec.body. But if I do that, that's cool and all, but I still haven't sent a response back to the front end. So I'm going to res.send back all of my messages. Okay. That's cool. I'm going to go back over to my front end. I'm going to push everything down here, and right under my event prevent default, I am going to say, hey, I'm going to get a response by awaiting a fetch. Red flag should go off. I used an await. I need to put in my async. Now I got my async in. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to go to my local host 3001, and I'm going to post to my messages. And the method I'm going to use is my post. And what am I going to post in? I'm going to post in my body. That is stringifying my object right here. I just borrowed everything that was inside that current messages push. I dumped it inside of my stringify. And I'm so proud of myself. I'm looking at this and I'm like, I got you now. I was so smart. I know CORS is going to be an error. We already said, hey, CORS is totally okay here. We did our server use CORS. This is all going to work the first try. I am going to say my data is going to await my response.json. And we're going to console log out our data. Pausing there before we test. Again, we're so smart. We know we have to stringify something in JSON before we send it in. So we're doing that. We're covering our method post. We've got our core set up on the back end. We're feeling pretty good about everything. We go over to the browser. I'm going to refresh to clear everything out. I'm going to type in my message and hit send. And ooh, that's not good. Messages 404 not found. Okay, well, I just went on this whole rampage about how it should be a singular message here. And what did I do? In my code, I said messages. Okay, didn't mean to do that. Take out that S. Now my message here is lining up with my message here because my post over here lines up with my post right down here. Okay, I'm gonna go back. I'm going to refresh everything out. I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3. I'm going to hit send. And even though it shows my 1, 2, 3 here, I want to look at what happened with my line 20. My line 20 has my messages array, and I open that up and I have my first message in there. Great. But I've got null. What do you mean null? I told you to take the body and push it into messages. Well, you pushed it into messages, but you pushed null into messages. What's going on? I gave you my body. My body is right here. What is the problem?
Tuesday.
Nothing with state. We haven't gotten into state yet. Rec.body by default, we don't have access to rec.body. We need to tell the server to use JSON parsing once the server gets set up. So we think we fixed it. We save it. We go back, we refresh, we type in 1, 2, 3, we hit send. I look at my messages array that came back, and now I've got an empty object. I'm like, okay, well, we got a different kind of error. I told you to use JSON. And now you have a rec.body, but you're not putting anything in it. Well, telling the server to parse JSON isn't enough. We need to tell the server, hey, when a request comes in, we're not just stringifying the JSON, we're also telling you in the headers that the content type is application JSON. Now, with this, because the request is saying, hey, all of the information in the body is JSON, Express can see that and say, oh, that's JSON. I can parse that out. So when you push it in the rec.body, everything will work as expected. So I go back to my server. I'm going to refresh everything out. Okay. Broke something. Broke something not in a way I expected to break everything. Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. What I ended up doing to fix that problem, I went back to my backend server and I hit Control-C to stop it. Then I hit up enter to restart it. That cleared out all of my messages. That cleared out any funkiness that was in the system. Now, when I come back over here and refresh, I get my one message. I type 1, 2, 3, I hit send. And now in my messages array, I can pop that open and see there is my message getting properly pushed in. Okay, that's pretty cool. What happens if hypothetically I open a new tab and go to localhost 3000? Oh, my messages are in here. All right, well, if I send a message here and I go back over here, it's not there. But if I refresh the page, it pops in. This is a limitation of REST. Does anyone remember what REST stands for? They're not on separate, well, they're kind of on separate servers. Our front end and back end servers are separate, Schneider, but they're sharing the same front end I'm sorry, they're sharing the same back end server. So because they're both tabs are looking at localhost 3001 to get the data, they are pulling that data in anytime that we refresh the page because we put a use effect in. So let's go back to REST. Representative state transfer. representative state transfer is what REST stands for. What REST means in a nutshell is that our front end is going to go make the request, and once it gets the response, it is done with our backend server. There is no way for the backend server, by using a traditional API REST-based approach, to say, oh, whoa, front end, there's new data here. Here's this new data. There's no way for the back end, the API server, to tell the front end there is new information. The way we solve that is by telling the front end, hey, every 15 seconds, every 30 seconds, go check for new messages. And if there are any new messages, go ahead and show that up in the interface. Now, we could build that out, but there is another architecture that we won't have time to get into in our curriculum called sockets. Sockets are an open connection, and they're a little bit harder, a little bit trickier to implement. But what a socket connection allows the architecture to do is, when a new message comes into the back end, instead of having to wait for the front end to check in for new messages, instead, because the socket connection is open, the socket can send messages, it can announce, it can publish, it can broadcast new data into anyone who is connected in via a socket. So sockets are something that are used more and more as more of our applications become real time. You can kind of think of a socket as Google Docs, right? When you can see someone else typing in Google Docs, that is because it is using a WebSocket under the hood to publish the changes of that document as they are getting made. So I'd like to just bring that up in case, did Ryan touch on sockets at all? Okay. Like I said, we unfortunately won't have too much time to get into a socket connection ourselves. But I do like to throw that out there because an interview question may be, what's the difference between REST and a socket? The vast majority of the internet runs on REST-based APIs, where they send in the information needed to make that API call. And as soon as that data comes back, the internet connection is no longer needed. There is no longer a connection open with the server. The server has responded, and we are done. There is no way for the server to get back in touch with the front end unless the front end does another request. With sockets, you need a steadier internet connection, but what a socket allows you to do once the connection is established is the server can broadcast new data updates as they become available. The reason why we don't spend a ton of time teaching that in class is because REST APIs are still the dominant form of APIs. GraphQL is basically a different standard that can be implemented over REST or sockets, but that's a way to design and query your data based off of an open standard. SOAP is certainly another tangent, Schneider. SOAP is SOAP is a older SOAP is an older standard. I would never build something using SOAP. I would never build new code using SOAP. SOAP usually uses XML, and XML has fallen out of favor for JSON because JSON is just a newer data format that supports more information and is a smaller file format than XML traditionally. SOAP was kind of the precursor to REST API using JSON. And so, yeah, it's just an older way of building an API. Okay, so we've got our messages sending. We can type in a message and we can open it in a new tab. And if we refresh, we can see those other messages. Anyone get that working? How are we feeling? Exona, you want to share your screen?
Yeah, my, can you hear me?
Yes.
My screen is, okay, where did it go? Okay. For some reason, when I press send on the message, it goes blank.
Okay. Uh, I don't see anything wrong with that. So let's go ahead and take a look. Pop open your. Oh, you know what? Let's reboot your backend server just in case there's any gunk inside of it. So just Control C out of that. And then up enter. Okay, now go to there and refresh, and let's see what happens. Okay, pop open your console in the browser. And that's going to show us some error in there. And scroll up to the top. And it is mad about a timestamp. Why do I not have that issue? To locale. That's another legacy thing. If you go to messages list line 42, your code is slightly different. It should be to locale string, not just to locale. Look at line 29. Yep. Save that. And you're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help?
I do.
Go for it.
Having a similar issue where anything I typed in doesn't stay, and I was trying to like go through the errors, but I kept getting lost.
Okay, so you have a 404 saying messages is not found. That means that there is no messages endpoint in the backend. So let's go look at your backend code. And you have a weird array on 14 and 19 that should not be there.
Oh, so just delete these.
No. That should be there, just not the square brackets.
Okay.
So save that and make sure. There you go. Now try going back to your front end and refreshing. And now it's saying 404 message not found because we're trying to get multiple messages. So go to your front end code and in app.js where we do our get, we should be getting all of our messages on line 21.
Oh. Okay.
Now go back to the browser, and not only did we get our messages log out in the console, but you can try and send a message now.
It's not showing up, so like it shows up in the console but not.
So it's showing up in the console means it's getting to the back end, which is good, but it's not updating your state in the front end. So let's look at your message input.
This over a bit. Am I missing something?
Yes. But I don't know what you're missing. Set
What?
messages, set messages, message input, set messages, message input, form, stringify your JSON, you're posting, you're logging your data, you're taking your messages, you're pushing in the new one, and then you're using set messages to the current messages. And current messages. Let me take the console log out that I put in right here. There are all of your messages.
Something
And
similar was happening to mine, but I was just using the server that used express.json.
the problem. Oh, do you not have, no, you have an event prevent default.
I think you're missing the props that set message current messages. Line 44, it's up there too. Okay.
Prop set messages, you pass in via the props here. That comes from set messages, which is set messages, which is set messages. Your use effect properly has that. So when it gets back to messages list, you're mapping over them, and if it's set to sent, which they are, it should be showing this sent message, which is just this div. It is not returning that div.
Love. Oh my god. Always those tiny little mistakes.
That one took me a minute, clearly.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
That was a good debugging example.
Because this whole time I was just trying to go through, like, trying my best to debug as much as I could, but I'm still just like, still not showing up. I got some other things fixed, but then return. That was it.
If it takes me 5 minutes to find the issue, chances are it was an actual legitimate good debugging session. Not to toot my own horn, but clearly it was not an easy fix. All right. Anyone else need help? So I've got one more concept for you, and then we're going to spend the rest of class throwing some terms in a sheet to review, and then I will let you guys go. So we've got our messages here, and we're feeling pretty good about this, and it's saving them in, and I can open a new tab, and wrong port, and I can see those messages in another tab. I can tell my backend saving all this information in, and I'm coming in here and I'm like, oh, you know what? I don't want to actually say hello. I want to say hello world. So I type in my hello world and I save. I come back over here. Where did my messages go? Well, NodeMon did its job. NodeMon was monitoring for file changes, and something changed here, and I saved it. And what happened to my messages? Well, they disappeared. because my server rebooted. Okay, well, servers don't reboot a lot unless we're doing development, but I mean, power outages are still a thing, or some updates may run on the server. We probably could come up with a better solution for storing our messages. Where should we likely be storing our messages?
Either, I mean, ideally on a server or like local storage.
So
Initially.
local storage is an option in the browser, but then we can't share those messages with multiple users, right? Because it's segregated over in the browser. We could kind of make a file to save all of this information in, but then what happens if multiple people are reading and writing the file at the same time? Well, that seems messy. What other concept have we learned where we could store the data?
A database.
Database. It's almost like we would like something like this diagram where we can say, hey, here's the client, here's the laptop. And in step number 1, we're going to make a fetch request to our server. Our server is going to match up to the correct route. That route is going to go to our database in Postgres. Our Postgres database is going to then return the results of the SQL query to our Express server. Our Express server can format or exclude or add to that data as it needs. And then it can respond to the request in number 1 with a response in number 4 that the front end can then deal with that data. So tomorrow we will start with Taylor going over all the Lock 4 events coming up. Then we will go to, we will get our servers set up from today's code. Then we will take a break and go to the resume workshop. And then when we come back, we're going to connect our database into our backend code and make a truly full stack application that will save our messages into the database. Awesome work. We built not only a full stack application today, but we're starting to see some data flow around, right? We're starting to understand how these fetches work. We're starting to get this to really be a point where multiple people could use, hypothetically, this chat app. So all of that said, let's switch over to tonight's outline, which I do not have filled out, but will be a good place to dump some terms. What are some terms that we've used that we would like to capture or review? Brandon, if you're talking to us, you're on mute. REST, Kalai put in the chat. Representative. And I'm going to capitalize the E there so you know. State transfer. A method of communicating with a server that initializes a request, and once a response is received from the server, the connection is closed. When another request needs to be made, the server needs all the context of the connection again. In other words, if we send an API call to the server and we say, hey, post this message, my user ID is 1234, we cannot say, hey, in this next API call, go post this message as me. The server is going to be like, new phone, who dis? Every time you open a new request to the server, you've got to include all the information, right? And so that is how REST is designed. And believe it or not, it is for 20 years, for 40 years, it was more efficient to send that context, to send all of that information on every request than it was to keep one connection open that could go back and forth. I will post a link in the resources here and in the live stream channel, a little bit more about REST and kind of how it was designed and what it really means for the internet. Great term. Thank you for throwing that out. Any other terms?
Express.
Socket, cores, express. Okay, socket. The opposite of REST, sockets are an open two-way connection that allows the server to broadcast information to the client, and the client can send information to the server. Cores, cross-origin resource sharing. Allows requests from different IP or IP, different URLs, let's say, or ports for security purposes. And Express, a Node.js server and framework that makes it easier to build APIs. So if you guys say, if someone is hiring and they say, hey, we use Node.js, you can say, oh, I know how to make a Node.js server using Express. And Express is running on top of Node.js. So you cannot say, hey, I made an Express server without realizing that you're using Node.js under the hood to make it all work. How can we prove that? Well, what's the command to start our server? It's node index.js or nodemon index.js, right? Node is what is running our server for us. We just happen to be using Express, which is an easier way, framework to get started building a Node server. Other terms.
You want to include nodemon in there?
Sure. Nodemon. Short for node monitor. I think I should probably Google that before I put that in writing. Monitors are code for changes and automatically restarts the server, making our code, our new code, runnable. Okay, well, it doesn't actually say that's how it came up with the name, but it does say monitor in the first sentence. So I'm gonna guess that it stands for monitor. Other terms. Okie doke. I'm going to hang out for the next couple minutes just in case anyone is close to getting their code working but just needs a little push. Otherwise, I will see you here tonight at 5:30 to get a rundown of events from Taylor. We'll get our servers up and running. We'll switch over to the resume event. Then we'll take a break, come back to class, and we will get our database integrated. Have an awesome night, guys. I will see you tomorrow. Happy February, by the way.
Hey, Max.
Max, if you could just help me.
Jennifer was saying something and then I'll come to you
Oh,
again.
sorry.
Just real quick, I want to try to get in with you on Friday morning. Maybe at 9. Because I
Yep.
got so lost that I haven't kept up, so I could use some extra help.
Sure. I do have a couple slots open tomorrow. I'm not sure if that works. If not, my Friday is almost completely open.
Okay, great. I'll get on that right now.
Cool.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Have a good one. Good night. Exona, go for it. You're on mute, and I'm gonna stop. Do you want this in the recording?
No,